The galaxy had many mercenary companies. They were known to fight for anyone who had the money to pay. Kings, warlords, and even traitors called on them when they needed strong fighters. No task was too dark, no price was too high. But there was one contract that no mercenary wanted to touch. The name written on it carried fear, called for war against the Deathworlder Special Forces. The contract passed from hand to hand. Commanders looked at it, some even laughed at the offer, but their faces grew cold when they read the details. The pay was high, enough to make a man rich for life. Still, every commander shook his head. They returned the contract and told their men never to speak of it again. In a smoky hall on a trade world, a young mercenary captain named Aaron picked up the contract. He was not like the older men who had fought many wars. His hair was dark and his face smooth, his eyes sharp with hunger for glory. He smiled when he read the words. He saw wealth, power, and a name that could rise above all others. Beside him stood Daniel, his second in command. Daniel had gray in his beard and scars on his arms. He read over Aaron's shoulder and frowned. He had heard the old stories whispered in taverns and camps. Stories of men who marched against the Deathworlders and never returned. Daniel placed a heavy hand on Aaron's arm. "You do not want this fight," Daniel said. "Those men are not like others. Their queen commands them, and they fight like no army you have seen. Even if you pay me double, I would not lead men into their fire." Aaron pulled his arm away. "Fear is for the old. You may be tired, Daniel, but I am not. If others will not take this job, then I will. I will bring back victory where all others failed. Then we will not live as sellswords, but as lords." Daniel shook his head. Many have said those words before. None of them lived to see them true. Aaron ignored him. He turned to the men gathered in the hall. His voice rose with fire. "Shh, brothers. I have in my hands a contract that no other captain dares to take. The pay is greater than gold. It will buy us ships, lands, and titles. They say the enemy is strong. They say the enemy never breaks. But I say no man can stand forever against our numbers. With my lead, we will crush them." Some of the younger fighters cheered. They were like Aaron, eager for fame and spoils. But others stayed silent. They had seen too much blood to laugh at such promises. Daniel watched them, knowing many would follow Aaron only out of loyalty, not belief. That night, in the campfires outside the hall, whispers spread. Men asked each other if they had heard the stories. Old mercenaries told of the Deathworlder Special Forces. They spoke of men who trained in storms and deserts until pain no longer slowed them. They told of soldiers who marched without food, who carried wounds that would kill another man yet kept fighting. They told of a queen who ruled them with iron and who gave no mercy to those who raised weapons against her people. The younger men laughed at the tales, calling them wild lies meant to scare children. But the older ones stared into the flames, silent and grim. They had seen enough in life to know some legends were born from truth. Aaron did not care for whispers. He began to prepare. He called for weapons to be sharpened, armor to be fitted, and ships to be fueled. He spoke of glory at every turn, painting pictures of gold and land waiting at the end of the war. His words stirred many, and soon his force was ready. Daniel walked among the men as they packed. He saw fear in some faces and blind pride in others. He felt a weight in his chest, for he knew what awaited them. Still, he followed Aaron. Loyalty kept him bound, though he knew it might lead to his grave. The next morning, Aaron stood tall before his company. "We march to victory," he declared. "We will not return with empty hands. We will face the Deathworlders and prove to all that they can bleed like any man." The men shouted, though some voices trembled. Ships lifted into the sky, engines burning. The contract had been accepted at last. But across the galaxy, in dark corners of taverns and halls, old mercenaries shook their heads. They knew what fate awaited those who dared to fight the Queen's special forces. They knew that Aaron and his men had signed not a contract of wealth, but a contract of death. The Queen stood in the great hall of stone, her crown resting firm on her head. Her eyes were sharp, not soft, and her voice carried weight that made every soldier stand tall. She was not a ruler who hid behind walls. She walked among her men, looked into their faces, and spoke with power. She knew every battle scar they carried and every test they had passed. Under her rule, no man or woman could claim easy service. To To serve her meant to give everything. At her side stood General Marcus, a man hardened by war. His arms were heavy with muscle, and his face bore a long scar from the days when he fought with blade instead of rifle. He saluted her, his voice steady. "Your forces are ready, my queen. They have trained as you ordered. No man has faltered." The queen nodded. "Then we will remind the world why no mercenary dares to face us. Enemy thinks numbers will save them. They will learn that discipline and fire break numbers as if they are glass." The training grounds roared with sound as the soldiers prepared. Lines of men and women ran through mud, their bodies covered in sweat and grit. Others lifted heavy weights until their muscles shook, then lifted again until they no longer trembled. Some fought hand to hand, striking with fists and knees, refusing to fall even when knocked down. The drill masters barked commands, and the soldiers obeyed without question. They did not ask for rest, did not ask for mercy. One young soldier named Ethan fell to his knees during the run. His chest heaved and his legs bled from cuts. The drill master raised a whip, but before it struck, Ethan pushed himself up again. He stumbled, but he did not stop. The others saw him rise, and none dared to quit. To quit meant shame, and shame was worse than pain. The queen watched from a high platform. She saw Ethan struggle and gave a small nod. She did not smile, but her eyes held a spark. She turned to Marcus. "That one will not break. See to it, he is placed with the forward squads." "Yes, my queen," Marcus answered. Inside the armory, soldiers checked their weapons. Rifles were cleaned until they shone. Blades were sharpened until they could cut hair from the skin. Agata. Armor was fitted, tightened, and tested. Each man knew the weight of his gear, the sound of his rifle, and the strength of his blade. They had drilled until every move was natural, every shot a strike, every strike a kill. At night they sat by fires, not to laugh, but to listen. Old veterans told stories of past wars, of cities burned to ash and enemies who begged for mercy that never came. Young soldiers leaned close, eyes hard, ready to carry the same fire into their own battles. The air was heavy with the promise of blood. The queen walked among them even at night. She wore no cloak of silk, only her battle coat. When she spoke, the camp grew silent. "You are the sword of our world. You are the shield of our people. Remember this. When you fight, you do not fight for yourself. You fight for the man beside you. You fight for the women and children who sleep in peace because you stand ready. You fight for me, and I will never let you fall." The soldiers struck their fists to their chests as one. The sound rolled like thunder. They would not fail her. Daniel's words on the far side of the galaxy reached the ears of the queen through scouts. She knew mercenaries were moving to test her forces again. It was not the first time. It would not be the last. She did not fear it. Instead, she welcomed it. For every battle only made her men stronger, and every defeat of mercenaries spread the name of the Deathworlders farther. Marcus asked, "Shall I send word to set ambushes?" "Not yet," the queen said. "Let them march. Let them believe in their numbers. And when they meet our line, they will learn the truth. No mercenary leaves this ground alive." The camp grew silent with her words. No man doubted her. No man wished to. For they had seen what happened to those who stood against the queen's will. Far away, Aaron prepared his men with gold and lies. But here under the queen's command, the Deathworlder Special Forces sharpened their steel and hardened their hearts. They were ready to meet him, ready to crush the pride of mercenaries once more. And when the day came, the ground itself would drink deep of blood. Aaron's fleet reached the burned world, where the battle was set to begin. The skies above the planet were dark with smoke, and the ground below was scarred with old craters and broken ruins. He looked out the window of his command ship with pride, thinking this place would mark the rise of his name. His men cheered in the halls, confident that their numbers would crush the Deathworlder forces. Daniel stood behind him, silent. His face was hard, his eyes filled with warning. He had seen too many young leaders believe numbers alone would decide war. He knew the Deathworlders would not fight with numbers. They would fight with fire, with skill, and with a will that did not break. The mercenaries poured from their ships, setting up camps and unloading weapons. They brought tanks, heavy guns, and piles of ammunition. The men were armed well, but their discipline was weak. Some joked, some gambled, some drank as if the fight would be nothing more than a raid. Aaron encouraged their laughter, believing it would raise their spirit. He walked through the camps, shouting promises of gold and land. The younger men cheered him, though the older ones whispered quietly. Daniel walked among them, listening to the whispers. A veteran mercenary named Paul pulled him aside. Paul's face was thin, and his eyes carried fear. "This is madness," Paul said. "I have heard of these soldiers. They do not fight like us. They do not rest. They do not stop. You should speak sense to your captain before we are buried here." Daniel shook his head. "He will not listen, sees only the prize. You must decide for yourself if you will follow him into this fire." Paul spat into the dirt. "If I had a choice, I would be gone already. But men follow orders, and orders bind us." On the far ridge, scouts of the mercenary force moved to search the land. They found nothing but silence. No tracks, no camps, no sign of soldiers. They returned with reports of emptiness. Aaron laughed when he heard. "They hide like cowards. They fear us already. When we march, they will scatter." Daniel spoke softly. "Or they are watching us now, waiting for us to move." Aaron glared at him. "You speak fear to weaken the men. If you have no courage, stand aside." The next day, the mercenaries began their march toward the ruins at the center of the world. Thousands of boots shook the ground. Banners waved, rifles gleamed, and the sound of drums carried across the field. Aaron rode at the front on a steel carrier, his voice calling out over the noise. "Forward, men! Glory is ours." But as they moved deeper into the ruins, silence fell. The wind hissed between broken walls, carrying the smell of dust and ash. The men slowed, rifles shifting nervously in their hands. Shadows seemed to move in the corners of the broken city. A sudden crack rang out. One mercenary fell with a hole in his chest. Another shot came, and another man dropped. Panic spread in the lines as soldiers looked around, unable to see where the shots came from. The ruins echoed with sharp fire, and every sound seemed to come from a different place. Daniel shouted, "Cover! Find cover!" He pulled men into doorways and behind broken walls, trying to hold them steady. But many ran in fear, and those who ran were cut down by fire from unseen hands. Aaron shouted over the chaos, "Stand and fight, they are only men." He raised his rifle and fired blindly into the ruins. The sound of his voice brought some men back to order, but the fear still spread. More traps triggered, explosives hidden under rubble tore holes in the lines. Sharp fire rained down from high towers where unseen figures fired without pause. Mercenaries screamed and fell, their numbers breaking with every passing minute. Daniel saw it clearly now. The Deathworlders had been waiting all along. They had watched, they had prepared, and now they struck with perfect timing. He felt the same chill he had felt when he first read the contract. This was no battle of equals. This was slaughter. By nightfall, the mercenary force had lost hundreds. The ruins were littered with bodies and smoke. The Deathworlder forces had not shown themselves fully. They moved like shadows, striking and fading, never giving the mercenaries a clear enemy to face. The men gathered close in broken camps, fear heavy in their eyes. The promise of gold now meant nothing. Only survival mattered. Aaron still stood tall, but his pride was cracked. He spoke of victory again, but his voice no longer carried the same fire. The men looked at him with doubt, and Daniel knew the first clash was only the beginning. The worst was yet to come. The morning came with a heavy fog that rolled across the ruins. The mercenaries rose from their broken camps with tired faces and restless eyes. They carried their rifles close, afraid of the shadows that seemed to breathe around them. The silence pressed on their hearts. Aaron stood before them, his coat torn and his face marked with dirt, but his voice still rose high. "Today we strike back. They think they can frighten us with shadows. We will crush them in open fight." Daniel watched the men. Some nodded, but many only stared at the ground. Fear had sunk deep. He knew words alone would not give them courage. He knew the Deathworlders wanted them to march, to push forward into another trap. Aaron ordered the columns to move. Tanks rolled forward, heavy guns turned toward the ruins, and men marched in long lines. Their boots clashed against stone, their banners lifted high. They wanted to show strength, but their eyes shifted at every sound. The first attack came swift. Gunfire burst from the high windows of a shattered tower. Mercenaries fell before they could return fire. Aaron shouted for the tanks to blast the tower, and the walls came crashing down. But when the dust cleared, the Deathworlder soldiers were already gone. A wave of fire struck from the left. The mercenaries turned, rifles blazing, but they hit nothing but smoke. Then the right side fell under attack, men cut down by rifles from hidden trenches. The soldiers moved like ghosts, striking and fading, never staying long enough to be pinned down. Daniel pulled men into cover, shouting orders to hold steady. Saw Deathworlder squads move through the ruins with deadly calm. Their steps were sure, their fire sharp. Not a single shot was wasted. Each strike dropped a mercenary, and each squad vanished before the mercenaries could answer. The mercenaries fired blindly, filling the ruins with smoke and noise. Their numbers pressed forward, but the line broke again and again. For every step they gained, they left bodies behind. The ground was stained dark with blood. The tanks rolled deeper, but traps waited for them. Mines buried in rubble exploded, tearing steel apart. The sound shook the earth, and fire swallowed whole crews alive. Aaron clenched his fists. Keep pushing. They cannot fight us forever. But Daniel saw the truth. The Deathworlders were not trying to hold ground. They were cutting the mercenaries apart piece by piece. Every squad moved with purpose. They struck where fear was strongest, broke lines where weakness showed, and faded before strength could gather. By midday, the mercenaries were split into scattered groups. Communication broke down. Some units tried to retreat, others pressed forward, and many simply froze in place. The fog lifted, but the shadows did not fade. The Deathworlders were everywhere, unseen but always felt. A squad of mercenaries found themselves surrounded in a courtyard. Gunfire poured down from rooftops. Ow. One by one they fell, their cries echoing. The last man dropped his weapon and begged to surrender, but a shot struck him down without pause. Mercy had no place here. Aaron saw the fear spreading, climbed onto the wreck of a tank, his rifle in hand. Do not run. Stand and fight. They bleed as we do. Hold the line. His voice rang out, and some men rallied, but others still broke away, running into alleys where they were hunted down. Daniel joined a group holding a street. He fired alongside them, his rifle steady, but he felt the truth pressing in. They were not holding. They were being tested, toyed with, and destroyed. Every time a Deathworlder squad appeared, men fell in seconds. Every time they vanished, silence returned like a knife at the throat. By evening, the mercenaries had lost another 1,000 men. Fires burned across the ruins, smoke rising into the dark sky. The dead lay in heaps, their rifles still in their hands. The survivors sat with hollow eyes, their spirits broken. They had seen their strength shattered by an enemy that fought with no weakness. Aaron still walked among them, speaking of victory, but his words sounded thin. The men no longer cheered, only listened in silence, their minds filled with fear. Daniel sat apart, cleaning his rifle. He knew the battle was not yet over. The Deathworlders had not even revealed their full strength. What had come so far was only the beginning of their fury. The night passed heavy with smoke and fear. When dawn came, the mercenaries were called to gather once more. Their faces were pale, their eyes hollow, but Aaron still stood tall before them. His pride had not cracked fully. He shouted, his voice filled with fire. We march again. We will not bow to shadows. Today we crush them in the open. Today we take their ground. Daniel stood near, listening. He saw the doubt in the men's faces. They were tired, broken, and frightened. Yet they still followed because orders chained them. The promise of gold no longer burned in their hearts. Now they marched only because they feared their own captain's wrath more than they feared death. The mercenary army formed lines, rifles raised, tanks rolling forward. They advanced into the ruins once more, their steps heavy. The silence of the city pressed in on them. They expected fire at any moment, and it came. Gunfire split the air, sharp and merciless. Deathworlder squads stepped from the shadows, rifles blazing with perfect aim. The first line of mercenaries fell before they even fired back. The second line tried to answer, but their shots went wide. The Deathworlders moved like one body, each soldier in rhythm, each strike cutting deep. Daniel shouted to hold steady. He fought with his rifle, his shots sharp, but he saw the truth. The mercenaries were not trained for this. They broke again, scattering into alleys and ruins. The Deathworlders pressed forward without pause, their line unbroken. It was as if a wall of steel moved against flesh. Aaron rode at the front on his carrier, shouting for his men to stand. He waved his rifle high, firing again and again.
Ow.
"Stand with me. Do not yield," some men answered, rallying around him. For a moment they pushed forward, firing with fury. A squad of Deathworlders fell under the storm, but it did not break the line. More soldiers stepped over their fallen, their fire never slowing. The Mercenaries unleashed their tanks, sending heavy shells into the ruins. Towers crumbled, walls collapsed, but the Deathworlders moved through smoke without fear. They leaped from cover to cover, their rifles cutting down tank crews with deadly precision. One tank after another fell silent, burning where they stood. In the center of the ruins, the two armies clashed head to head. The Mercenaries fought with desperation, their shouts filling the air. But the Deathworlders fought with discipline. They stood shoulder to shoulder, their line never breaking. Where one fell, another stepped forward. Their eyes burned with cold fire, and their strikes carried no hesitation. Daniel felt the ground shake as the clash grew worse. He fired beside his men, sweat running down his face, his arms heavy with the weight of battle. But he also felt awe. He had never seen soldiers fight like this. Wounded Deathworlders did not fall back. They fought until their last breath. No cry of pain, no fear in their eyes, only the fight. The Mercenaries saw it too. Fear spread faster than fire, and dropped their rifles and tried to run. But the Deathworlders gave no mercy. Shots cut down those who fled. Blades struck those who begged. The ground was soaked red as the mercenary lines broke once more. Aaron fought like a man possessed. He shouted, cursed, and fired until his rifle ran dry. He pulled a blade and rushed forward, cutting down to soldiers before he was struck back. His armor saved him, but the blow sent him to the dirt. His men saw him fall, and their courage broke fully. He scattered, their cries echoing through the ruins. Daniel dragged Aaron to his feet, pulling him back behind broken walls. "You cannot win this," Daniel said, his voice sharp. "These are not men we can break. It will not stop." Aaron's face twisted with rage. "I will not retreat. I will not be remembered as a coward." He pushed Daniel aside, raising his blade again. "If they want blood, they will have mine." But the Deathworlders did not give him that moment. Their line pressed forward with thunder. The Mercenaries broke completely, fleeing into the night. The battlefield was theirs, and no strength of mercenary arms could take it back. By sunset, the ground was covered with the dead. Smoke rose into the sky, carrying with it the end of mercenary pride. The Deathworlders stood unbroken, their rifles raised, their queen's banner high above them. They had faced the storm and crushed it without fear. The mercenaries who lived knew the truth. No man could match the Deathworlder line. The night was heavy with smoke from burning ships, and the ground shook from the clash of men fighting with all their strength. Jack led his unit through the ruined streets, his voice steady as he gave orders, carried his rifle close, his eyes scanning every shadow for danger. Beside him, Claire kept her grip tight on her weapon, her movements sharp and controlled. They had fought together long enough to move as one without words. Their unit was small, but every soldier was hardened by battles that would break others. Enemy outnumbered them, but numbers meant nothing against training and will. Mercenaries had expected fear. They thought men and women from the so-called death world were like others they had faced. Instead, they met soldiers who stood firm, even when wounded, who kept fighting when outnumbered, and who never backed down. Jack's team moved like a blade cutting through armor. Every step forward was taken with discipline. Every strike meant to break the line of the mercenaries. Bullets tore through the night as Jack pushed his unit deeper into the heart of the city. The mercenaries tried to regroup, but they were not used to enemies that pressed forward with such force. Jack raised his hand, signaling his men to hold. The street ahead was blocked by a barricade. The mercenaries waited behind it, confident that the wall of metal and firepower would stop the Deathworlders. Jack studied it for a moment, then looked at Claire. "Flank them," he said. His voice was calm, as if the world around him was not burning. Claire nodded and led half the team down a side alley. Jack waited with the rest, drawing fire to keep the mercenaries fixed in place. Explosions lit the night as grenades hit the barricade. Then Claire and her team struck from the side, their attacks sharp and merciless. The mercenaries broke, scattering in panic as their position collapsed. Jack advanced with steady steps, his boots crunching over rubble. He did not smile, even in victory. To him, this was only one step in a long war. Behind him, his men moved with the same cold focus. None celebrated. They knew the battle was far from over. As the unit regrouped, Jack noticed a young soldier shaking. His rifle was steady, but his eyes betrayed his fear. Jack placed a hand on his shoulder, firm but not unkind. "Fear is natural," Jack said. "What matters is what you do with it." The young man swallowed hard and nodded. In that moment, he stood taller. Aid. The team pressed on, heading toward the command center where the mercenary leaders had taken position. The closer they moved, the stronger the resistance grew. Machine guns roared, and mortar cracked open the ground. Yet Jack's soldiers pushed forward with unshaken resolve. Every time one fell, the others closed ranks, carrying the fight forward. They were bound not by fear of death, but by duty to each other. Inside the command center, the mercenary leaders argued. They had never faced such relentless fighters. Every trick, every trap, every line of defense had failed. They had hired the best killers from across the systems, but not one of them wanted to face Jack's unit again. Whispers spread through their ranks, men refusing to step onto the battlefield. The name Deathworlders carried weight now, and it was heavier than armor. When Jack's unit reached the edge of the command center, they paused only to regroup. Claire wiped the sweat from her brow, her face hard with determination. "We finished this," she said. Jack gave a short nod. He led the charge, his men moving as one. They breached the defenses with a storm of fire, their shouts echoing through the halls as they cut down resistance. The mercenary leaders fled deeper inside, hoping to escape, but the unit was relentless. Jack moved with steady precision, his rifle never wavering. Claire covered his flank, striking down every enemy that tried to corner them. Room by room, hall by hall, they pressed forward. Their boots pounded against steel floors, the sound like a drum of judgment. By the time they reached the final chamber, the mercenaries had thrown down their weapons. None dared stand. Jack stepped into the room, his rifle lowered but ready. He looked at the broken leaders and said nothing. His silence was more crushing than any words. The mercenaries knew then why no one wanted to face Deathworlder Special Forces. It was not just their strength or skill, but their will that could not be broken. The battle for the city was not yet finished, but the heart of resistance had been crushed. Jack looked at his men, saw their tired faces, and knew they would keep fighting until the end. Because that was what it meant to be born on a world where only the strongest survived. The city lay in ruins, its streets covered in smoke and rubble. Fires burned in the distance, and the sound of falling stone echoed through the empty blocks. Jack stood with his rifle across his chest, his eyes sweeping the horizon. Round him, his unit gathered, their faces hard and silent. They had broken the mercenary leaders, but the fight was not yet done. Scattered groups of mercenaries still roamed the city, desperate and dangerous. Claire moved to Jack's side, her gear covered in dust and blood. She looked at the men behind them, each one marked by the long nights of battle. They had stood against impossible odds and come out stronger, but exhaustion pressed heavy on their shoulders. Jack knew they could not rest until the city was secure. "Split into squads," Jack ordered. "Sweep every street, every building. No one slips through." The soldiers obeyed without hesitation. They moved with precision, their training guiding each step. Jack and Claire led one squad down a wide avenue where smoke drifted through broken windows. The silence was tense, broken only by the crunch of boots on stone. Jack raised his hand and the unit froze. A figure darted across the rubble ahead. The mercenaries were trying to regroup. Jack signaled his men forward. Gunfire broke the silence, sharp and quick. The squad returned fire, their shots controlled. Within minutes, the last mercenary fell. Jack checked the bodies, his eyes cold. He turned to his men. "No mistakes. Keep moving." Hour by hour, the Deathworlder soldiers cleared the city. They moved through alleys and ruins, taking out pockets of resistance. The mercenaries had lost their will to fight, but some still tried to resist. Each attempt ended the same way, crushed under the steady advance of Jack's unit. Stories spread fast among the mercenaries who remained. Whispers of soldiers who did not break, who did not fear, who fought like the land itself had hardened them. By the second night, the last of the mercenaries had thrown down their weapons. Jack stood in the square at the center of the city as the prisoners were gathered. His men formed a line, rifles ready. The captured mercenaries avoided his gaze, their heads bowed. They had learned the truth the hard way. No contract, no gold, no promise was worth facing Deathworlder Special Forces. Claire stepped beside Jack, her eyes scanning the prisoners. "It's done," she said. Her voice carried no pride, only fact. Jack nodded once. He knew victory came at a cost. His men were alive, but each carried scars that would not fade. As the dawn rose, Jack addressed his unit. "This city is secure because of you. You stood when others would fall. You fought when others would run. Remember this day, not for glory, but for duty. You are Deathworlders, and the world now knows what that means." The soldiers stood silent, their eyes fixed on him. They did not cheer, they did not smile. They carried the weight of their name with quiet strength. Jack saw it in them, the same unbreakable spirit that had carried them through fire and blood. The mercenaries were marched out under guard. Word would spread across systems faster than ships could fly. The name Deathworlder would be spoken with fear. No mercenary would want to face them again. Contracts would be refused, deals broken, battles abandoned before they began. Their reputation had been carved into stone with blood and fire. When the sun climbed higher, Jack walked the streets with Claire. They passed burned homes, shattered walls, and broken steel. The city would rebuild, but the memory of the battle would remain. Jack knew there would be more wars ahead. Enemies would rise again. But he also knew that his soldiers would be ready, because they were forged by a world that gave no mercy, and in that fire they had become unstoppable. As they stood on the high wall overlooking the land, Claire asked, "Do you think they'll ever try again?" Jack looked out over the horizon, his jaw firm. "They might, but they'll remember this city. They'll remember what happened when mercenaries thought they could stand against us. And they'll think twice." The wind carried the smell of smoke, the echo of battle fading into silence. Jack rested his rifle against his shoulder and turned back toward his men. The war for the city was finished, but the war for survival never ended. For men and women born on a death world, that truth was carved into their very bones. And that was why no mercenary wanted to face Deathworlder Special Forces.